Hi climbers and friends. I've been thinking a lot about lanyards lately. I went to the Legend of Geezers competition, and I didn't do as well as I wish I would have. And it's the only competition that I actually compete in, and haven't done it for a while because of COVID. But a lot of things came up, and some thoughts on how I run a lanyard, and then we had some discussions about lanyards. And I went down in my shop and I pulled out some lanyards that I had been using over the years and took a look at them and reconfigured and rethought about how I am going to do my lanyard. My thoughts are not so much based on whether you're a working arborist or a recreational or sport climber. So if I make a reference to an ANSI rule or to an ISA competition rule, they may apply to you, they may not. I mean, it's up to you what you're going to use for a lanyard. But I will say that in the Z133 we talk about snap. I'm going to talk a little bit about the snaps. Snaps and carabiners, but snaps or snap hooks, they're unique because they have a captive eye on them. It helps to keep that oriented, which is very important on a lanyard that's being taken off and put on and tossed around the tree quite a bit. So it's got an eye on there. It needs to be, this is the minimum. It needs to automatically close. It needs to do that, and it needs to automatically lock. So right now I can't push on this gate, if you can see that. I can't push on that gate until I do another action. So it takes one action there, and it takes another action there to open the gate. So it needs to be self-closing and auto-locking. That's the minimum requirement. A carabiner, on the other hand, so this is aluminum snap, much lighter on your harness. You can throw it around the tree. This is a steel snap. It, in my opinion, has an advantage. It's not about the strength, but it has an advantage of when you're tossing this over limbs or around the tree or around a big tree, it has some momentum on it so that it's easier to get around the backside of a tree. I mean, that's the advantage to the steel. The rest of the mechanism is pretty much the same. So, you know, it's the steel body that makes it a little heavier. Looks very similar. A carabiner, on the other hand, has to be self-closing, and it also takes two actions to open it, and it needs to be double locking. I will mention that when these things are made, a lot of times we try to get extra safety features in there to make it safer for us as arborists or tree climbers. And while I'm on that subject, let me just mention too, because we're talking about tree climbing. If you're rock climbing, you typically have somebody else that is control of your belay device, and they are the ones that are keeping that belay device under tension, and they're also making sure that it stays configured. When we're climbing in a tree, we don't have that. That's up to us, and we're moving around the tree. We're not just going straight up and down. We go horizontally, we stand on limbs. Sometimes the tension comes off of our climbing system, then it goes back on. That's also different than a industrial arborist, sprat type of training. These guys are typically climbing from a rated anchor. They'll typically have two lines, and they're typically hanging from them all the time. So it's pretty easy for them to maintain tension in a climbing system. We don't have that. So a lot of my foundation of how I look at these things come from those perspectives that those are things we don't have. When we're in the tree, you guys are working chainsaws and you're looking for dead wood and struck bys and all of those kind of things, and you're trying to protect yourself. The less you have to worry about when it comes to your climbing system or your lanyard, the better off you'll be, because there's a lot going on. We don't have rated anchors either, so we're not going to take close of both of our climbing lines and put them on the same anchor. So another thing about a carabiner, I think if you're using it in a lanyard configuration where it's often unloaded, whether it's even just hanging on the side of your D's, if it's unloaded, it needs to have some means of staying configured and properly oriented. In a competition, we're always checking our carabiners, and I think this one I might be able to get to stay open. Like right there, this would be a fail in a competition. When I'm using it, I can always get it to close, but if I can get it, and this is gonna have to be blown out and cleaned up, and now I can't get it to do it. But if you get a carabiner that won't close all the way, that's not a good thing. It has to be closed. So remember too, when we're in the tree, we're dragging these things around the tree. I constantly at competitions and when I'm around climbers, I'll see them tossing the carabiner around the trees. They may prefer to have a carabiner on the end of their lanyard. So these things are getting tossed around the tree, they're getting dragged across the bark, through the leaves, and anything like that can jam those mechanisms. While I'm talking about that, I want to mention discussion about snap that have a third action. Again, supposedly to make them safer for us. I feel like, remember that guy on, what was that show? Who was that guy that was always over the fence?
Wilson.
Yeah, I feel like Wilson here. Anyway, that was, I love that guy. That was Home Improvement, right? The name of the show. So, here's snap. Takes 3 actions, is self-closing, and then it takes 2 actions like you'd build into a carabiner to make it where that it will stay closed. But notice, and I'm going to point this out, and it doesn't matter, the 3 action has this extra bracket right here, and the way that the mechanism works, it's hard to see if you have one. I hope you could take a look at it. But again, we are tossing these things around the tree constantly. We're dragging them through branch unions and all those kind of things. This metal, that's not a real thick piece of metal in there. And you'll notice right now that it's not going closed. If this little bracket right there, you can see that I've knocked it around a bit, but if that little piece of metal right there gets jammed underneath this tab, it's going to stay just like this. And so that built-in extra tab that was supposed to help us be safer, requiring 2 actions in order to unlock it, can actually bind it up and keep it open. So that's a consideration when you're looking at these devices. Now I can push that back down and get this where it now functions properly. So it takes an action there, takes an action there, takes an action there before I can open the gate. Still self-closing, self-locking, but it takes those particular actions. So, you know, just saying I want this to be safer and have 2 actions before I can open it may not actually be making it safer. So now it's starting to get really cold. This was the lanyard I was using in my competition, and I'll post my little video of my competition. And in a recreational environment and climbing with friends, I liked it because it's so multifunctional. I can take it off of the rope and I can put it on a climbing line and go up another tree to help a friend right away. It works doubled moving rope, single rope, all of those things. But with a lanyard, and you can see in my video while I'm doing my work climb, when you have this kind of bulk in there and you're laying on it because you're out there trying to do the plumb bob station, it just didn't work for me. So I'm going to probably take this off and just put it on the side of my climbing bag and have it available. Unicenter, great device for going straight up and down a rope, a little bit of limb walking. It's basically a rope clamp and a figure 8 built into one, but that's not going to be my lanyard anymore. So what I've done, I'm going to go back to just a good old traditional, but basically a doubled moving rope configuration with a carabiner and a captive eye, and there's not a lot of sit back in there. And the advantage to this is there's very little vulnerability to a large object or a vertical spring. A friction hitch does not have the vertical spring. It's the spring action that makes this engage when I push down on it is going this direction. It's a horizontal type of a squeeze, and so it's much less susceptible when you're laying on your lanyard, you're laying on the limb or the branch or whatever, trying to get in position for that to work. So that's probably what I'm going to go back to. And I have on the end of this, I have sewn in just the regular snap. So it's a double acting or a self-closing, self-locking snap. And that's my preference. This is aluminum, so that's what I'm going to be going to. And just for fun, this was a steel lanyard, a steel snap on the end of this lanyard. And notice here that this was a Xeon type of a deal. Again, a vertical type of spring doesn't take much to disable it, especially when it's not under tension. There's just takes not even an ounce probably to disable that spring. So that's a consideration when you're doing it. And I don't even know if this is probably the proper rope for this Xeon. They used to come and require the use of the rope that it was with. I think that's been modified. Functions very well, but you have to think about how easy that is and how vulnerable this is to getting dragged around a branch and getting side loaded or having that mechanism bent. Again, while I'm about it too, these were long lanyards. I don't climb on a long lanyard anymore. Remember too, at the end of your lanyard, you need to have a stopper knot, or you have to have a splice or sewn termination. This was a lanyard that is actually quite functional. Again, you can take a friction hitch and you can drag these around the branch. That's one advantage to a friction hitch. I love it. But this was about as inexpensive and functional as you can imagine a lanyard being. It's basically just a large carabiner. This happens to be a ball lock carabiner, maybe a consideration, and one of these little Petzl plastic sheaves and a ring. Let me put this up there. Don't pay any attention to that being cross-loaded right now. But look at how well this functions. If you're trying to build a lanyard and do it on a limited budget, there's just absolutely nothing wrong with that. So that's one option when it comes to a lanyard. This was another option, and of course you always have an option of whether you may want to use a friction saver. This is just web tubing, and this was the triple action or double locking snap. This was just an inexpensive micro pulley. again, we've taken some means of making sure that this stays oriented, that it's not going to be side loaded when it's not under tension. And it was just basically a pulley. But notice with this, notice that there's no setback in that, because the micro pulley on that boat snap comes right up underneath the hitch, and so there's very little setback. Kind of a cool little option. Another option for a cambium saver. And then on the end of that was my Captain hook. This, by the way, I missed this. This, by the way, is the end of my lanyard that I'm presently using and will continue to use and practice with. On the end of this, just for the competition and aerial rescue, and this is so functional, I'll always have a carabiner with me, and I'll always have a rolling lock, because they're great for hauling stuff and just they're so useful. But the way I use this is an aerial rescue, or any kind of a rescue. When it comes time to make that solid connection between you and the victim, this carabiner will go on my anchor point, and now I can just bring that victim in close. And if the victim is laying in a branch union and I need to pick them, a lot of times you'll see somebody standing there and really struggling to pick somebody up. With this, I can take my foot ascender. If it's a struggle to get the victim lifted up out of a branch union, while this is attached to my harness, I can step on this and use the muscles in my leg and push that person up, and then bring him very close and make a solid, hard connection between me and the victim. So hopefully that makes some sense and kind of clears my mind as to some of the things that occurred to me at a competition and some of the discussions that we had. Thanks for watching. And never do that with a carabiner or a snap. Just because I was doing it for my video, you never do that. Just think, we're talking about this small mechanism right there. You imagine if you load this up right now, how much pressure you're putting on those side mechanisms and how effed up that's going to make your snap.
More. Moving on. Remember your audibles on everything, Richard. He is, I can hear him. Looking good. Use your legs and use that tree.
Yeah, everyone keeps doing this, but it's kind of off. You're going to do this handbell and it come down. And then having to go punch you over. You're not at about it. Like you could just, instead of going on this side, you go under the limb.
And your slack is to make that drop landing. Yes. Straight down. Feet right there.
Yeah, you would just swing back to this
now walk
line,
it out
and
and sit in your harness.
instead of going this way.
So you get past that union, lay back.
Yeah,
Take the other fork.
not
Take the other fork.
Really?
The other side.
Bucket.
There you go.
You landed in a little early.
There you go, Richard.
You got landed in anyways.
Walking back. You got this.
And that limb that you're landing into.
Lean back,
that's not a
Richard.
life
Lean back.
supporting
There you
situation.
go.
Like if you were to slip, and fall off the limb,
Great work, Richard.
Stay light out there.
Doing good, Richard.
Yeah, don't go past that stub and lanyard in. Right there, reach for there. Lanyard, right now. I didn't make It's caught on that little stub on your right, by your right foot, Richard. You got got it looped on it. Yeah, that's it.
Stuck on a little nub, buddy. You're stuck on a stick behind you.
Yeah, he knows now.
Alright, there you go, Richard. Call it. Alright, on that lanyard.
Yes, sir.
It's stuck real good.
And clear, soft.
There. Two hands.
One hand.
Remember to say.
One hand.
Yeah,
There you go, Richard.
That's it,
Go
Richard.
in your gear. There you go, Richard. Good work, man.
You guys need a little slack to get off that stuff. There you go.
There you go.
There you go.
That's
You're clear, buddy. You're clear. Yes, sir. You still got a little pressure on that, man. There you go. You're doing good, Richard. You're holding a great balance there. You're fine. You're holding yourself really good, Richard. There you go, Richard. Yeah, keep your composure. Get straightened up.
Did I hear time?
Yes, sir.
Good job, Richard. Good work.
time and find somewhere suitable to come down. Yes, thank you for doing that, guys. You're welcome.
Porter over there. I better go take Porter another apple.